All right, everybody, we are in the garage today. We're going to be working on building a display for my work again. The last one we did was the display case diorama that was in Classic Toy Trends magazine. Today, we're going to be doing something different. We're going to be building a ceiling layout. This is going to be for the holidays. It's going to go in our office here at the school that I work at. So what I've got, just a quick sketch up. I measured out what we're going to be doing. So you can see the dimensions and the curves and things like that. We're just using minimum curves from Fast Track that comes with your Lionel starter sets, because that's all we're going to be using on this. Something that's going to be lightweight. I'm using sanded 1/2-inch plywood that I picked up at a local shop. Ideally, I would go 3/4 on this, but this is going to be hanging from ceiling grid. And so I wanted to make sure it's as light as possible. And so we're going to be using some hooks to get it hung up in the office and things like that. So it's going to be kind of a little rectangle there. It's going to kind of work itself around. And so what I'm going to be doing right now is I'm tracing out the cut lines. I've got 2 sheets of 4x8 that I think should cut it. My widths are going to be 4 inches, which leaves a little bit of space on either side of the Fast Track. And then, so what I'm marking out like the curved sections, and then I'm going to just slice the straights. And I'm going to try to get as much of this on film for you as possible. And then we're going to mock it up and put it together. I'm going to show you how it's going to link together.
All right, so here is the plan. I have it marked out now. This is like the overall square footage that we're going to be looking at taking up. If you sketch something out like this with 90-degree corners, that's not the length that you're going to need. It's going to be massive because you're not taking into account the radius of the curves. Now we're using 036 curves here that are coming in our starter set. So we have to factor that in to this space as well, but you kind of get the linear footage here of kind of what we're looking at. And I kind of marked off the maximum amount of wood that will be needed if we're using 90 degrees, but that's going to get shorter when we use our curves.
Over here is where I've been mocking up the curves. And again, I did this at 4 inches, but we're going to increase this to 4 3/4. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that out. Here's my 90-degree, two sections there are going to get my 90-degree curve. I'm just going to bring that in to those lines. Right? And then that's obviously going to cut over. That's going to give me distance, the same distance that I need for that. So then this is going to be waste here. My goal is to optimize the amount of board usage that I have. And so, moving that in, I also have to be moving that over for those slices. Could you do something like that to get a better use of space? I'm thinking that probably is the best use. So I'm gonna go ahead and mock this up. These are gonna be harder to cut out. I can use a jigsaw or just cut them down and then go over to the bandsaw to cut these out. For my straight sections, I'm gonna rip them with my track saw, and I'll show you how we're gonna do that today. There's a couple different ways that we could do this. One, we could just rip it with a circular saw. Another way is to use a table saw. Third way is to use track saw. Fourth is 6-way, all sorts of other different types of saws. I have a track saw. I purchased this a number of years ago for my wood shop that I have. And it is an expensive tool, but man, is it convenient. So the way that this tool works is you've got this piece here, sits in this track, right where you want it, and then you can plunge it down to safely make nice cuts right along the track, so it's a nice perfect straight edge. Now we're using some plywood. I've got some sawhorses here. I got the hose hook up to the dust collector, but I've also got my safety gear that I'm gonna have on as well as we make this cut. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna line this up with the markings that we have on either side, and then make sure it's right where we want to make that cut. And then it's as easy as ripping it down. Big thing is, we're using sawhorses, so we want to make sure that we're not going to dive into the sawhorses underneath. So my sawhorses are pretty far back. I'm actually going to inch them forward just a little bit to give a little bit more support because this does flex quite a bit. There we go. That'll provide a little bit more support there. Now I'm going to be using ear protection, eye protection. I wear a respirator, even though we've got the HEPA filter on the shop vac. Better be safe than sorry. All right, so I've got the 5 8-foot sections cut down. So now we can just focus on the curves that we have to do. And if we look at the plans, we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so I think we're gonna have plenty of room just to be able to do this on one sheet, which is great. So I'm gonna go ahead and line these up and just start marking them out, and then we'll come back and cut them. All right, so here is what we got cut out. It's not perfect, but it's good enough for what we're gonna need. And now what I can do is I can lay this edge on edge and then begin to cut out my curves. We'll see how many we can get out of this. So I'm gonna mark them all out now. See how many we have to, hopefully we can get all, I need 5. So I just need a few more. We should be able to do it all with what we've got left. So let's go ahead and mark those up.
So I've got my full 8-foot straight sections cut out, and we can look at the plans here. And again, we're looking at plans as if we don't take into account the radius of those curves. So I'm just calculating here, like how many 8-foot sections. So I need 1, 2, 8, full 8-foot section there. And then I've got a couple 4s. So 2 4s, I can use 1 8-foot section for that. Obviously, when you take a 8-foot section, cut it in half, you're gonna lose about 1/8 of an inch off. If you're doing something that you need perfect dimensions, you have to keep that in mind. For this project, 1/8 of an inch is not going to make or break our dimensions. Plus, we're going to have to recut these once we factor in the radius of the curves, because that's taking up some of that linear footage also. Okay, so we've got our sections cut out to the full linear footage. Now, I did mess up as I was kind of sketching this. I messed up my purposefully messed up design by having a 4-foot section and a 2-foot section when I could just cut a 6-foot section. So that's that board up there at the top by the garage door. Now it's going to be laid out like this. What I'm going to do now is basically just lay this out so we can see just how large this layout, the ceiling layout, would be if we did not take into account the radius of the curves. So let's go ahead and lay it out. So here you can see I've got the curves laid out here, and this section closest to us has got that, it kind of jogs over to the left here and then curves back towards me. You can see how those curves are taking up significantly more space than what we had planned for, because we only used 90-degree curves. So, you know, you could do a little math and math this with some simple geometry, or we could just, you know, figure it out with straight edge. So grab a straight edge here, and we're just going to mark off to roughly see just how much linear space we need to remove from our straights. Move the camera. So we move this here, we're about 21 3/4 or so inches. So I'm going to remove that from each of the straight sections. And then if there's 2 curves connected to that straight, I need to remove that times 2 because of the linear space, the other curve. So this small section in front of me, there's 2 curves from one on either end, obviously. So we have to remove that length twice because of the space that curve is taking up. So we're going to go ahead and chop those straights down a little bit. And then what we'll do is we'll begin putting track down, and we're going to find some more imperfections in the cuts and things like that. And we're just going to cut it and shape it and make it work
as we go through this project to get this put together. But you can just see just how massive this is when you don't take those curves into account, which is why it's important to use a track planning software to do this, unless you're just able to freestyle, which is kind of what we're modeling here. But again, it's always better to have a better plan so you know exactly what you need to get these projects done. So this is what you can see. This is what happens when you assume 90-degree curves for something that is not going to be able to use 90-degree curves. Here we've got everything laid out. So some slight, just minor adjustments, but looking good. So now what we have to do is join all the seams. Now I'm obviously not gonna be able to move this all together and then mount it all together. It's gonna have to be done in sections. And so the way we're gonna do that is I'm gonna be using other little pieces of hardboard or plywood and then using some wing nuts. So we're gonna drill some holes and then have joints where those are going to attach, and I'm going to show you how that's going to work here in just a second. And then the other thing we're going to have to do is put screws on the sides for a chain that's going to hang this from the ceiling as well. And then we can start putting track down and getting that mounted in place as well. So made some more cuts and things like that to make this fit, and then laid the track down, just screwed it down in a few places so we could get all the cuts right and cut out any inaccuracies. Now, this isn't the prettiest thing in the world, what we're looking at, and that's okay, because what we're gonna do is take like that fake snow stuff and have that underneath as well. So that'll just get stapled up underneath it, so it kind of looks like it's floating, and then, you know, have some snowflakes falling from above, or falling from the platform itself to give it a pretty neat effect. So what I'm gonna do now is plug this in, go grab a trolley, and just see if it can navigate this. Now, it's gonna be full voltage, so it might go full send over the edges. I'm just gonna make sure I've got constant voltage with this track, and then I'll begin putting my toggle or my wing nuts in for joining the different sections of the wood. So here's how this is going to work. At least this is how it's going to work in my head. So we're going to put a piece of wood here like this. And this one's a little wider than I can fit there, but that's going to be okay. What we're going to do is we're actually going to throw a screw in on one side, and then we're going to drill out a hole for a bolt. That way I can take it apart really easily. That screw will remain in that space. So that's how we're going to make sure that we get this all put in the right spots, but also make sure that these all get put back in the right locations. So here's an example of how I have this joined. So just another piece of 1/2-inch plywood, some scrap, screwed in, and then toggle bolt, or excuse me, just a bolt here with a wing nut, so I can unscrew this easily and separate these so I can get it to where it needs to go, and then get it up into place so I can raise it up in sections. So that's how that's set up. Next, last thing that I'm going to be working on will be to do the screws for the chain. What I'm thinking of doing is actually waiting until I'm in my location, because there's some cabinets that part of this curve is going to rest on top of the cabinets. So I want to make sure I've got the height right. So I'm going to do that on site. So we're all set here. I'm going to label the joints so I know exactly what goes where quickly. And then I'm going to go ahead and break this apart. And just like that, it's all broken down, ready to go in the car and head off to get mounted on a ceiling somewhere. So let's go there. All right, so we're here working on getting this thing put up. What I'm using is just these hooks that you can get on Amazon for drop ceilings. Now, the drop ceiling that we have is rated for a certain weight, which is why I use 1/2-inch plywood instead of 3/4, just to buy me some extra weight. I then have 20 feet of chain, and then I had some of these hooks in my wood shop. So these are what I'm using to attach the track to the ceiling. What I'm doing now is just cutting sections of the chain, and then to hold it in place, I'm using zip ties to hook it, and then that allows me some adjustment in height as well once I get it set. And then I'll probably double up the zip ties just for added strength. Not bad. So some of this is old track, and we'll have a few drops in power with this trolley. But for the most part, I like the speed. Now we have to cover the wood up with some fake snow. So I've got a staple gun and some fake snow sheets, and we're gonna go ahead and do that now. All right, so we got a layer of snow up there. It's not perfect, but we're gonna have snowflakes falling from it and stuff, so I think it looks good enough. So pretty happy with how this has turned out so far. I just have the Polar Express trolley up there. We will be changing that out with some other trains as time goes on, but the snow will double kind of as clouds, I guess, if we want to keep this up after the winter season. We'll just have to wait and see. But pretty happy with how this has turned out.